Hi. A film that came out at the beginning of the year, which I finally managed to catch up with, is Colour Out of Space. It's the first film by Richard Stanley in 25 years. He came to prominence as an independent horror director with the films Hardware and Dust Devil at the start of the 90s. And then his big mainstream film was picked up by one of the main studios. I can't remember which one, and that was to be a film version of H.G. Wells' The Island of Dr. Moreau. Notoriously, Stanley was fired from it after the first week's shooting, and replaced by John Frankenheimer, with the film, as a result, being a notorious disaster of egos running riot, um, total lack of control and total lack of vision, and Marlon Brando doing whatever he wants. Um, Stanley has had a long time in the wilderness, and now he's finally back with a new film. It's a long time passion project for him, adapted from HP Lovecraft's short story. The story is that on a farm somewhere in New England, where a man who's growing tomatoes and raising alpacas is also caring for his cancer survivor wife and his three children, a meteorite lands one night, a strange coloured meteorite. And the following morning, it appears to have vanished, but it starts to exert a strange force upon the surrounding environment. It seems to be getting into the water. It's affecting the plants and the wildlife in the area as everything becomes penetrated by this unearthly colour. And gradually, it starts to mutate things in horrifying ways, and everything starts going quite crazy. It's from Spectrevision, which is an outfit founded by Elijah Wood, which was responsible for Mandy, Christopher, Nicolas Cage's terrific film from a couple of years ago. And I was hoping that this would follow a similar pattern of being a very distinctive vision from an independent filmmaker that would take great advantage of Nicolas Cage's charisma. But while that is a very dark, strange film that harnesses the craziness of Cage's performance, the problem is that here he has to play someone who's quite normal. And Nicolas Cage can't play normal. He can only play crazy. So as the film progresses and events start to get more and more bizarre, you have monstrous animals straight out of John Carpenter's The Thing. You have two humans fused together, and Cage's character starts to lose his mind. He lapses into what sounds like a bad impression of Donald Trump. Sounds very much like this, very much talking through his nose. And it's really weird and off-putting and not scary. Another issue with the film is the terrible dialogue. There is some truly horrific dialogue, very bland and false and phony sounding, which undermines the believability of the situation. The visuals are terrific. One of the problems with adapting the story, unfortunately, is that on paper you can say they saw it was a color, but unlike any color that they had ever seen or anything that occurred in nature. And your imagination fills in the gap, that it is something that you cannot describe, something you cannot comprehend. And Lovecraft writes about that a great deal, that the horrors and bizarre creatures in his stories are such that you cannot describe them, because to look upon them is to go insane. The problem with depicting this in a film, of course, is that you have to show the monster in some way, and in this film you have to show the colour. The colour itself is a kind of pinky magenta colour. The logic being that magenta is something that is actually not normally occurring in nature and requires multiple light wavelengths to overlap, which makes it in some way unnatural. But the upshot is that it is a recognizable color. It's a kind of pinkish magenta color. So that removes the unearthliness of the color itself. But one previous film version actually got around it by filming in black and white, but the color itself was in color, which made it alien to the environment of the story. So it has problems. It looks fantastic. There are some great visuals, particularly towards the end as events become more and more bizarre and psychedelic. There are some fine supporting performances. Jolie Richardson is an interesting choice to play the wife. You wouldn't see her in a crazy horror movie like this. And I think that shows the issue that instead of Nicolas Cage, it would have benefited from having a much more grounded, straight leading man, someone in the Tom Hanks, Harrison Ford type role, someone who's convincing as an ordinary house husband type who, when he goes crazy, it becomes completely frightening because it's not something one would normally see from a personality like that. But overall, I found it rather disappointing. It's it fails to use the story's horror in an appropriate way. I felt it's hobbled by the banality of the dialogue and the unbelievability of the environment. We never truly sold it. Another thing that gave me pause, of course, is Lovecraft's own reputation. He certainly now, and quite probably at the time, would have been known as a white supremacist. So the idea of him being concerned about an alien colour that comes and consumes everything nice and normal certainly bears a degree of thinking about. The film is quite separated from that kind of idea, however, but even so, it's still not really satisfactory, and it's definitely a bit of a missed opportunity.